Hi, everybody. I am very excited to be here for my next conversation, Disentangling Patriarchy, and I'm very excited to have Yasmeen Hassan, who you can see on here today.
Right.
I'm going to read the bio. So here goes. Okay, here's this little introduction to Yasmeen. Okay, Yasmeen Hassan is a Pakistani attorney and international women's rights activist. She was the global executive director of Equality Now from 2011 to 2022. Previously, she was with the United Nations Division for the Advancement of Women, where she worked on the implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Secretary General's Study on Violence Against Women. She has served on the Council of Foreign Relations Advisory Board on Child Marriage and provided expert guidance to the UN Trust to End Violence Against Women. In 1999, Yasmeen edited Equality's Now first report on discriminatory laws. We're going to talk about that today. She has served on the Council of Foreign Relations Board on Child Marriage, provided expert guidance to the UN Trust to End Violence Against Women, and advocates for women's rights through appearances in numerous media outlets, including CNN, Al Jazeera, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Yasmeen holds a JD from Harvard Law School, where among other subjects, she studied Islamic law and women's rights. And for Yasmeen, this is from her bio, but I really like this, the law makes a critical difference. It's a statement of your worth as a citizen and influences the direction your life will take. Growing up in Pakistan, her defining moment came at age 10 when her country's laws were Islamicized, treating women as second-class citizens. Advocating for women's rights became a major part of her education and career, and ultimately leading her to author the first study of domestic violence in Pakistan, which became the nation's submission to the Fourth Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. And for those of you who don't know about the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, it was a big deal where, she'll talk about this, 189 countries agreed on a plan to it was called the Beijing Platform for Action, and it was considered really the most progressive blueprint, as far as I know, that's ever been replaced for advancing women's rights. And it's where Hillary Clinton gave her famous speech, she was first lady at the time, where women's rights are human rights. Okay, Yasmeen has dedicated her life to advocating for women's rights. She's an expert, really the expert, I would say, in my experience, on using the law to create a more just world for women and girls. And the last thing I'm going to say is executor of Equality Now, when she was executive director, she led all kinds of campaigns to address the legal and systematic, which is really important for me, change to address the violence and discrimination against women around the world. They tackled the most difficult issues, challenging ingrained cultural assumptions, and calling out inequality wherever she could see it. Yasmeen, hi.
Hello, Jill. That was a very good and long introduction. I don't think
long. I just want to get everyone
out.
you really know this stuff inside and out. You've worked all over the world. You're constantly, you're talking to you and you're like, I'm off to Pakistan today. I'm off to Malaysia tomorrow. Next week, I'm in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you really know about, better than anyone I know, the situation of women and girls around the world. And what a lot of people don't know is that laws are set up in many countries and in the United States, everywhere, that discriminate against women. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about the global situation and the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And people would be surprised. Well, no, you should also, since you've been following this podcast, probably be surprised, because if we are looking at patriarchy, how it is around the world, the legal systems around the world come out of patriarchal frameworks, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, my goal was really to chip away at these systems and fix the discrimination, right? I mean, you talked a little bit about my growing up in Pakistan, and I'll just tell people who are listening, it's like, when I grew up in Pakistan up to age 10, we were a secular country. There was not formalized discrimination against women. And then in 79, after the Iran Revolution, we had a military dictator who Islamicized Pakistan's laws as a way to get his own legitimacy. That was the world political stage at the time.
Yeah.
What he did is like literally made women second-class citizens. So we got laws.
You went from living a life like in the United States, whatever, and you saw this happen. You like lived handmaidens tale.
Well, I don't know if United States is the best example. Okay. To how many ways, like we are fools, we are the United States, and the United States is one of the only countries in the world that hasn't ratified CEDAW, and is also one of the only countries that doesn't have gender equality in its constitution. So I feel the US is way behind most countries
True.
in that way for legal equality purposes, right?
That is true. Okay. Very important. Good to
Yeah,
remind.
it is, because I mean, there are 3 countries in the world that haven't signed CEDAW, and Iran and Saudi Arabia. No, if Saudi Arabia has, Iran, US, and Somalia, I believe, are those countries.
Can you explain what CEDAW is? People don't know.
CEDAW is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's one of the human rights treaties, global human rights treaties that most countries have signed. Now, the most signed treaty is the CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the second most is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.
And the US did not sign it.
No, US hasn't signed it. US doesn't play ball and doesn't play. So we can talk about that, but I think the main point is patriarchies around the world. It shows up in different ways. It'll show up differently in Afghanistan as it will show up in the United States, but I don't think we should be fooled that no place in the world has achieved gender equality, not a single one. The closest are the Nordic states, right? There's a gender equality index that the UN puts together every year, and they look at so the Nordics are kind of the highest. And most recently, the lowest are the Islamic countries. And that wasn't the case when I was growing up, because Islamic law had not been interpreted as restricting women's rights till the 70s, till the Iran Revolution. Anyway, so that's what happened. In Pakistan, women legally lost rights. You couldn't sign business documents. You couldn't give evidence in court. If you couldn't prove your rape, you could be flogged for being a fornicator, right? So all sorts of things came into being. And that's what also led to the creation of the women's rights movement. When suddenly you're not fooled, that's when you activate. Kind of like in this country, when Trump got elected and we had the Women's March, because suddenly people's eyes were open, like they were pretty, like set and going this way, and they're like, what does this mean?
Activism fades when you don't feel threatened. I mean,
yeah.
Right? I mean, that activism, it fades. I mean, we haven't.
It fades because people get complacent. Like, I mean, if you're going about your life and then suddenly there's a threat, you will react to that threat.
Yeah.
And that threat goes away, it's like we activists will continue working because we are looking for the cases and the situation. But most regular people, it doesn't affect them unless you have a family member who survived a sexual assault and been treated badly by the courts. Like unless there's a reason.
A personal connection or something.
Yeah, yes. So the same thing happened in Pakistan, 1979. And it really led me as a kid to look at, if your government doesn't think you're equal and it's just on paper not going to treat you as a full citizen, where can you go? There's no amount of education. There's no amount of anything that will make up for it, right?
Yeah.
And our goal was like, patriarchies around the world, women and girls are discriminated against everywhere. But if you can get the legal framework, the structural systems right, that's an essential first step. Exactly. And that's what we were formed. Equality Now was formed to do this, to make sure that laws treat men and women equally wherever they are. And if there's any particular form of violence against women, because we know there are different forms of violence against women around the world. There's stalking, sexual harassment, child marriage, female genital mutilation, trafficking. I know you did that with Ruchira, sex tourism. You have to call it out, and you have to have a law against it, and you have to have that law implemented. And that was our contribution to achieving gender equality. Have we achieved it? No, we haven't. Right? Like, you just have to be very honest. Like, I know that you and I were
getting better, weren't we? Weren't things sort of getting better around the world?
Things are better. Like, if I look at, you talked about the Beijing Conference on Women, right? Like, that was in 1995, right? And I forget how old we are. That 1995 were when we were young people, like, activating. We were so excited in 1995 because it seemed like 189 countries all agreed with us.
Yeah.
Together in Beijing, there was excitement. There were women around the world, Irani women, Saudi women, Burkina Faso women, and we all were excited to have this document, and government signed it. The one thing they said in that document, there were many things said in the document, but what Equality Now focused on was that government said that in 10 years, they are going to make sure that laws, all sex discriminatory laws, are amended or repealed, right? So, okay, our work is done. We don't need to worry anymore.
Right.
4 years after Beijing in 1999, and you had read out that I did Equality Now's first report on discriminatory.
Yeah.
What came about is like, we're like, not a single law has changed. What did government sign? And then we realized that governments themselves did not know what a sex discriminatory law was. They signed something, but they signed it in Beijing. The people. So my job, I was a corporate lawyer at the time, was to come to Equality Now and start collecting laws from all over the world that showed in its language how men and women were treated differently, right? And at that time, this is a funny thing, internet was just starting off. This is like 1995. You could get any amount of pornography on the internet. Anytime you type the word woman in the internet,
No.
porn, right?
No.
I was trying to look for laws that discriminated. So we started like faxing women's rights groups and women's lawyers saying, can you read the text of your law and send us every law that on the face of it treats men and women differently?
Actually written like men.
Yes. So I'll give you the 4 categories of laws, right?
For children.
Number one was there was discrimination in marital status. Like, right, when men and women get married, women didn't have the right to enter into marriages of their own volition. We had all these Neapolitan, oh, why am I missing that? From Neapolitan times.
Yeah.
Saying that women could not consent to marriage. Their guardian had to consent to marriage. Women could not marry if they wanted. They could not divorce when they wanted, whereas men had rights. They didn't have rights to custody of their children. They couldn't own marital property. The property was all the property of the husband. So there's all that in marital status. Then there was stuff in economic status. Women were not allowed to have certain types of jobs. Women were not allowed to own properties, that kind of stuff. Women weren't allowed to work certain hours, like late at night on certain types of employment. And then personal status laws. You're not allowed to travel. You cannot have a passport. You cannot give evidence in court. So we collected all this. And the worst laws, Jill, were laws that allowed violence against women.
That's always shocking. So you're allowed to beat your wife. You're
allowed to beat your wife if you're chastising her. You are allowed to kill your wife or your female relative if you suspect that she's been unfaithful. There was
a wife in many states in the United States, right?
Yeah, and in the state there was also child marriage was allowed in so many places, and a rape of a wife who was a child wasn't counted as rape. Marital rape is still like allowed in many places, including, right, because they exempt rape and marriage from the definition of rape. So
that's on the books, isn't it? I know in the United States, I think in some states it is, right?
It is, yes. So because we put all these together and we made sure that we had countries from around the world, right? It wasn't all global South countries. The US was included, France was included, like all these kind of laws. And that was the first report on sex discriminatory laws in the world. And from that time, like the first time when we launched that report, and we did it with a lot of fanfare and artists like yourselves, and Meryl Streep launched it, and Sarah Jones played a part. She did a presentation at the UN, which was much more entertaining than most UN conferences. Half of the laws that we had mentioned in our report got repealed because governments were so shocked that they had it. They've gone and looked at this stuff. Where we have had the least success really is laws that are underpinned by religion or tradition. Like when we look back at all these years, so there have been a lot of laws changed. We've gotten a lot of laws against violence against women. When we started out, not a single law against domestic violence. Now most states have that. On honor crimes, on female genital mutilation, what have you. But where we've had the least success is really laws in marital status, and that are underpinned by either Muslim, Christian, Jewish laws, right? And those have been almost impossible to deal with. And part of it has been the fault of us, the women's rights movement, because we have said, we don't want to deal with religion, right? Religion is outside. Our rule of law is a secular rule of law. But as you notice, the world is getting more and more religious, whether it's Christian, Jewish, Muslim. And then the women's rights movement is not engaging with these religions that determine how you live your life and that determine family laws for most people. So this
That's
part,
really interesting. So that's a big
right?
part that's missing, is really involving these religious groups in this sort of conversation.
And because yeah, you're right. Because and you've noticed that women haven't been part of religion. Religion has been in the dominion of men, all priests or whatever, rabbis or
I
whoever.
was gagged at our Seder the other night, and I noticed this, which I'm sure it's been there a lot. It's obviously it's been the Bible where they start literally talking about the patriarchs. It's part of the Seder thing, and and I'm like, actually, this is the language they say. Like, you don't even have to decode anything. It's the patriarch.
No,
I mean, it's right
exactly.
there, and that is the word, and that is the language, and that's how
And
they
it's
say
a positive language for them, right?
it.
It's like,
Exactly.
we are the patriarchs and you should look up to us. And that's the
And they don't try to disguise it. It's as if we were talking about this, as if it's natural, as if it's a natural thing. And we talked yesterday about these quotes from Aristotle and Plato that are just sort of shocking. It's like, yeah, men are meant to rule, and women should be in the home. And this is the natural hierarchy of things. And that's kind of the way it is. And it's not natural. It's totally constructed, which is a positive sign, because if it's, in my opinion, and we can talk about this later, if it's made by a society, it can also be transformed. Like, we have the power
absolutely.
to change all of this. So
Yeah, and that's what we were doing our part. And I mean, we are still doing our part in changing all of it. And then you had to decide, it's such a big thing that where do you start changing? And we really felt that, like, changing the laws, because the law really is what the government thinks of you, what worth your government assigns. There can be no deeper thing. If a law says you inherit half of, and which is what the law in Pakistan says, I will inherit half of what my brother will inherit, because worth is twice as much as mine, right? Then that's my worth to my country. There's nothing I can do to go around that. So it's really important to get the laws right. I mean, the laws will not fix anything. The laws, what we have found, that even though a lot of laws have changed, like 3/4 of world constitutions now have gender equality as a protected right, minus the United States. We still don't have the equal right.
Saudi Arabia, can you repeat those?
But Saudi, many, I don't know if Saudi Arabia's thing has, Saudi Arabia, I think, has a exception for in accordance with religion. And that allows them to interpret religion and say, well, this is not in accordance with religion. Right? That's how they get around. So we've been successful. I think women have come a long way in the last 3 decades. I think legal rights have expanded. In terms of implementation of rights, that leaves a lot to be desired, right? So we've just, at Equality Now, we've started working, because the other thing is, you leave implementation of laws to the national governments and to NGOs. But NGOs are shrinking and dying because there's very little money in the world that goes towards women's rights. In the US alone, 1.6% of all philanthropic funding goes to women and girls.
Really?
6%. Yes, that's the last survey.
That's shocking.
Most of that goes to religious groups. So for advocacy, it's 0.02% or something like that, right? And after COVID and all, that pot is shrinking. So what's happening is a lot of grassroots women's rights organizations are dying out. And they are the people that women on the ground look to be able to safeguard their rights, or to take their cases, or to provide them services. So I think we are in a dire situation, and we have to come up with different frameworks, because women have been always very resourceful. You know that the women's rights movement has never been heavily resourced, like, the First Amendment, free speech movement, or whatever,
Right.
So we have done a lot with very little resources. But even if all resources kind of shrink up and the organizations don't exist anymore, we are going to be.
How do you do with the fact that many young people, and myself included, I mean, a lot of people just don't realize that? Like, I don't think they realize how we've all watched Handmaid's Tale, and you see that can happen.
Yeah.
I said something in a quote with Margaret Atwood, like, you've seen this happen. Like, this can happen. People are not getting, I don't think they see that. I mean, maybe they see it now with reproductive rights and abortion. They're sort of getting, okay, this can happen, and you really can't get an abortion in many states now,
Right.
or it's very difficult, and you can't even get the pill. Like, how do you see that maybe that people will get more energized again and really realize, oh my God, like, we can live in Handmaid's Tale. It's not that far away. I mean, it's.
Oh, absolutely. I think people are. Like, I mean, I think the moment was not even the abortion rights, it was the Trump election. After all he said and did, and how he showed up in and people still voted for him. that led to, I mean, this is not surprising, the results we got on Roe versus Wade, right? That was already foretold from the time he got elected. So I think it's a wake-up moment from the US, because I do think people in the US had become very complacent.
Yeah.
Like, go to people and say women's rights, and they say this is something for third world countries, like you're working.
Yeah, exactly.
We are also working here because there's a huge issue. And what I think the wake-up call is, like, any rights you have can be taken away at any moment. And that's what people have to realize. You have to have a robust movement safeguarding rights, because they can be taken away as easily as they were given if somebody is hell-bent on taking them away. Right.
And by the way, this is again one of these things where they're kind of saying that's their agenda. That I mean, when you got to take these sort of, you know, Christian America, whatever, that is sort of banded with the Republican Party, what they say they mean. They're not pretending. They really mean this. Like, that is their agenda. I mean, it is.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, human rights came from Christian, you know, Martin Luther King. Yeah. Jimmy Carter. They were Christians, and they were
using. Yeah. It's not.
And so the whole concept, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was like part of the Universal Declaration, it came from Christian theology, kind of, that all human beings have rights. But now you have all the Christian right, which is the anti-right movement. So it's interesting, the lessons that history teaches us, right?
Yeah. Well, I think they realize they can use it. You know, obviously the far right, you know, realizes they can use it, and it's something that is a workable strategy for them to get votes, and they've just gone full into that. But I think all of us don't realize, and for me, this started when I just could not believe that Trump won. I couldn't believe anyone who was out, like, not even hiding their misogyny and hatred towards him. It was very clear. It was on TV. We all saw it. I mean, there was not even an attempt to masquerade it. This is who the guy is. And what was the percentage of women that voted for him? I don't know.
I think they said, well, again, don't quote me, but I think it was 52% of white women voted for him.
And like, that's the guy you're going to pick? Like, do you understand, like, who he is? Like, it is shocking. And then you think, okay, you know, and this is where we get to the media and stuff. And so much of this is internalized. You told me a story about a TV show in Pakistan that people watched that you said was really, with a gay couple.
Oh, no, it was an American show that people watched, which was Modern Family. Like, I'm thinking how much influence media, now global media. This is what, when we were starting our fight, we didn't have this global media.
Yeah.
Has a huge impact on changing consciousness and driving change in perception, right?
Yeah.
And especially, I think, things that are entertaining and are not messagey, right? So if you have sitcoms like Will and Grace, Modern Family, and you're trying to, and those were a Hollywood strategy for gay marriage, you know, like that change happened. I came to college here in 1987. There was a lot of homophobia in this country, massive, right? And the gay rights movement was like, we are here, we are fabulous, we are queer, we are I mean, they were in your face, right? It was like going head to head. And then they shifted the strategy, and it became like, we are just like you, embrace. And that was super effective. And that was effective because of entertainment. That's what I believe. And that message went to Pakistan. Like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer has had a huge impact on Dubai, in Egypt, and in Pakistan, because they found a new way of being. A girl who doesn't have to be super smart or super anything, and can be kick-ass personality, powerful, right? So I think media going forward has a huge role to play in changing perceptions. And I think that we should get behind that. Because I think more than the law, like when I started out in this field, the law was the best way. I think law is super important still.
Also, yeah.
Right? But I think using media and entertainment, because the world is made up of billions of people, you have to reach them wherever they're at and whatever they're watching. And I think the media gives us a huge tool to do that.
When the culture shifts, then you're more likely to pass laws that are in line with people's culture.
And also implement those laws, right? Because what we are seeing now is we get a lot of laws passed. People don't believe in them. Governments don't believe in them. So they're not going to implement them at all. So having a law that is not used is actually sometimes worse than not having a law at all. Because then they're like, oh, this law is there, but it doesn't matter at all, right?
It's not enforced. You're talking about enforcement. Yeah. Like environmental laws. You see that all these environmental laws are there, but everyone gets away with Like, well,
Yeah.
I think that's a good
And rape laws, for example, like, I
Right.
mean, rape laws, many places, right? They are unenforceable.
Yeah.
So, um,
And Amy talked about that, like people think it's a he said, she said, but most crimes, you don't doubt the victim. Why is that? Why do when someone says, Amy told this brilliantly, but if someone says I got robbed, you don't say, oh, are you sure you bought your TV? Are you sure your TV is in your house? You're like, you say you got robbed and they believe you.
yeah,
No one wants to make up a story about being raped. Like, why would you do that? Why would you put yourself out there,
in this, yeah. But it's also like, oh, what I was talking to you about Napoleonic codes.
yeah.
Across the Middle East, we had laws on rape saying that if you were raped, right, the rapist marries you, the rape goes away, right? And that came from the French. It wasn't inherent to the Middle East. We had it in every Middle Eastern country. We had cases around the Middle East. There was one girl who was 15. She was raped by a guy. She went and complained about the rape. She was extremely traumatized. And the judge, instead of punishing the rapist, made the girl marry the rapist.
Oh my God.
Rat poison and killed herself, right? Because that was the law. She now had to marry the guy she raped. Around the world, we've had these kind of laws because rape was seen not as a crime against the woman, but against her family, the family's honor. So the family's honor is restored by marrying the girl to the rapist. Can you imagine that? Like, can you just imagine you're raped by somebody and now he's your husband and you have to be raped by him every day and every night?
Right. Or Jared was talking about what happens in the Purna communities in India, where your husband is your husband is basically your pimp. So your family marries you off to your husband, and then the money's
Yeah.
Oh, we have 5 minutes, and then
Okay.
your husband, who's also a young person, takes you out and pimps you, and then you come home and you're having sex with your husband. I mean, you're really truly an object to be used and to make money,
Yeah.
and it's okay. We have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you so much, Yasmeen. You're such a wealth of information. We could go on for a really long time. We can do this again sometime. You can see I'm in my Katie Couric mode. I have this down now. Do we have? Okay. Do we have any questions? How do we get to a question?
They can unmute themselves.
Oh, if we have a question, you can unmute yourself. How do we know if this is happening?
They'll unmute themselves, but I have a question.
Okay, we have a question. Here, you can come here.
Oh, sure.
Okay, we have a question. Do you want to?
So you're talking about like meeting people where they're at, and then also that the world is becoming more and more religious. And I'm wondering, kind of marrying those two ideas of how do we create change without alienating people and alienating a large part of the country, at least in the US, that is becoming more extreme in terms of their religious beliefs, that maybe there is a path that way. Or any thoughts on
that? I think it's really bizarre because look, I grew up in Pakistan, right? I've also worked in Afghanistan. I have never seen things as polarized as they are here. People can't, and it's on the left and the right. It's not just the right, right?
Right.
People cannot hear people who disagree with them. And I think you become a richer person. You might not agree, but you're going to learn something. And perceptions are, when people are talking about anti-racism, anti-whatever, people from different places have different, and with different upbringings are going to have different perceptions. So if you can create a space to talk, and by talk, I mean, listen, like it's not talking at people, it's really listening to people. I have found that in all my years of activism, even if people are the most misogynistic people, like I worked in Afghanistan, if you sit and listen to them respectfully and ask them questions, you're likely to get a better and a more generous response. And, maybe you'll move a little bit and they'll move a little bit and you're closer together, right? Because you cannot have, the world is not a bubble. Everybody's not going to be the same. This also enhances the richness of the world is based on people are so different ideas, different backgrounds. So it's really shocking to me how we become this left and right, and most people are in the middle and they can't say anything on either side. So we have to do something about it. And I really start by listening rather than talking, right?
So do you think in communities, like how could you see that playing out? Like, I know community organizing is so important to the work you've done and to I mean,
So,
like to Gloria and stuff. How
right. I mean, I go talk with
Mhm.
Muslim communities, for example. I was having a walk with a friend yesterday, and I was telling her that in New York, I very often talk to the Hasidic Jewish community, right? And she's like, how can you? There's da da da. And I was like, because I'm interested. When I came to the US as a student from Pakistan, my host grandmother lived in Menominee, Michigan, Upper Peninsula. And I would go there every Christmas because she was like my grandmother. And they were very right wing. They all listened to Rush Limbaugh. They were like, that was the crap. And I listened and I learned so much. And then because they trusted me and I listened, they could then listen to me, right? Because I was like, I'm going to this pro-choice march and da 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 da. And then we could have a discussion as opposed to being. So I don't know. There's something to be said. You are not going to change everybody's mind. And like, why should you want to change everybody's mind? You want to exist in a world where people can live in harmony and nobody's, dictating their way on anybody else. Now, the bad thing is if the people, like the other thing that happened in Menominee, Michigan, is they were killing gay people, which was beyond the pale. People would talk about this person, he was not a Christian, he was a homosexual, so they dragged him. Those things had to be dealt with immediately. Crimes, hate crimes and all that. But I still think that there is a way of listening to people and connecting, and by opening up dialogue, you can achieve a lot. And otherwise, I think we are done for, because the world is going to be like this side and that side, and people aren't even allowed to ask questions. You can agree with 3% of this side and 8% of this side, but you're too scared to open your mouth, This
Right.
is what.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, this is no easy answer, but I'm just saying you have to me, I have to start with listening.
Right. That's really
Yeah.
important. And let's just end this on something hopeful, because and then I'm just going to go back to this when you talked to in this Margaret Atwood thing, you gave a really good quote, which was sort of hopeful. I'm just going to read it. Like how I'm going to read you the quote, which you said here. Okay, which I can't find right now.
That's okay. But I'll say, okay, go
How do
ahead.
you see us moving ahead in a hopeful, like, if we recognize where we are, what are steps that some of us can take to as activists or as voters or as responsible humans who care about the world and the planet to make the world a more equitable? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, without hope, none of it makes any sense, right? Like, so we are doing the work we do and we see so much craziness. We can only do it if we have hope. And the hope is we can change it. And I think every single person around is an agent of change within their own community, whether it is by listening to people, whether it is on recognizing something. You walk by a massage parlor, is this a trafficking situation? You take action. Is it like you recognize, oh, I am the head of a company, I have these employees, what do I do for them? How do I help women rise through the ranks? How do I recognize? Everybody has a different sphere of influence.
Right.
I think you have to recognize is that you can do, because it's all these little drops that make up the bucket, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we do that, and we are all alert and we are all empathetic and we also are genuinely interested, I think the world does change. I mean, you're doing this with your art project, right? So you're creating art that is trying to understand and getting other people to understand. That's a contribution. We are doing it through making legal change. Other people are doing it, women in film. Like, people are doing things in very many different ways, and you need that whole ecosystem to come together. Because honestly, things have changed better. When people are like, oh, things are so bad. Things are not so bad. Things are, when you talk to Gloria Steinem, even after Roe versus Wade, she's like, it's not as bad as when we didn't have any Roe versus Wade, because most of the states are still going to have abortion. And other people are like activated to keep that right. So it doesn't go back to that, right? So I'm just saying there is progress and all of it are part of it.
Right. Thank you so much, Yasmeen.
That's what I would say.
This was amazing.
Thank you, Jill. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Bye.